so much for. All right, so let me repeat myself. Hey, Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. This is the third lecture already for our metabolic workshop. And I'm going to start off today with a quiz. How's that? But it's kind of open book, so we don't have to panic or anything. So I'm just going to go through the questions, and you can just jot it down in your little notebook or in your brain. And this is going to segue into our presentation today on how fat is related to diabetes and prediabetes. So first question, how old are you? You don't have to tell me, you can just say it to yourself. Now, the reason why this is an important question is because the older we are, the higher the risk for type 2 diabetes. So not that it's going to get everybody, it's not a guarantee, but it's definitely age is a risk factor. Number 2, what is your biological gender? Now, it's interesting that men are more likely than women to have undiagnosed diabetes. And that kind of makes sense because when you look at the literature, you know, men still are lagging behind when it comes to wellness visits. And then, of course, that's what I just wrote there. So it's not because it's a gender linked thing, it's because it's a healthcare linked thing. Number 3, if you are a woman, have you ever been diagnosed with gestational diabetes? Now, gestational diabetes means that when you were pregnant, you actually developed diabetes during pregnancy. And if you had diabetes during pregnancy, you have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes after the baby. And what's very interesting too is that moms that have gestational diabetes usually give birth to very large weighted babies. And the larger the weight of the baby, the more risk the baby has of developing type 2 diabetes as an adult. Do you have a mother, father, sister, or brother with diabetes? Well, family history is also a very important question that we ask in healthcare because there is familial relationships and genetic relationships between conditions and genetics. Have you ever been diagnosed with high blood pressure? Now, this is one that a lot of us might not understand, but having high blood pressure actually also increases your risk of type 2 diabetes. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's the relationship there? Well, high blood pressure is a cardiovascular and perhaps a kidney dysfunction. Have dysfunctions in those organs, that's going to put you at risk of pancreatic dysfunction, which of course would lead to diabetes. So that's the relationship. And what I see in practice oftentimes is people that come in to see me have something called metabolic syndrome, which is a triad of prediabetes or diabetes, hypertension, and then some sort of weight issue, either overweight or obese. And high cholesterol, we throw that one in there too. Are you physically active? Well, if you're saying no, that's also going to increase your risk of type 2 diabetes, not just from the standpoint that you might have a hard time keeping a normal weight if you're not exercising, but also remember your organs need to exercise too. And how do they exercise? By getting more of that cardiovascular function, more of that blood flow going through the organs. Number 7, what race or ethnicity best describes you? Now, this one, I can tell you that there are certain racial and ethnic groups that are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes than others. From a genetic perspective, Asians have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes at a lower weight. So they don't even have to be obese to develop type 2 diabetes, whereas in comparison, a Caucasian, oftentimes we see type 2 diabetes in somebody that's way overweight or obese. And when you look at Hispanic Americans and African Americans, there's also a higher risk in that racial group as well. And then you need to think about what is your own height and weight ratio. And your height to weight ratio would be considered something called your BMI. So when you go to the doctor and the nurse weighs you and gets your height, they're calculating something called the body mass index, because we know the higher your body mass index, the higher risk you have to developing prediabetes and diabetes. Now, of course, what I'm talking about is the type 2 diabetes, not the type 1 diabetes. I'll make a distinction in a couple minutes when I do some of my slides. But let me just show you this. New share. Let's see. Hopefully you guys can see this and you'll tell me if you can't. Let's see. Let's see, is it this one? Nope, it's not that one. Just, oh, let's see if it's that. Nope, it's not that one. Let me see, probably can't see it. Let me see if I can just get to it. Calculate the BMI. Okay, there it is. All right. Let's see, I just want to switch to another screen. All right, can you see that screen? Just, nod your head if you can see the BMI screen. Okay, perfect. So if you ever wanted to calculate your body mass index, it's very easy if you like to do the math, but you know how panicked I get with calculators of math. So I go to a website. This is the NIH, and you just type in your height and your weight. So we'll do me. You know I'm going to make up the numbers though, right? Okay, so I'm 5'6" on a good day. And then I'm 145 pounds. Okay, so my BMI is a 23.4. All right, what does that mean? When you look at these categories, this is what will categorize you as, is the ratio of your height and weight comparable to your health factor? So if I'm normal body weight for my height, if I'm 25 to 29.9 BMI, that would mean that I was overweight. And then if I'm greater than 29.9, like at 30 or greater, that means I have obesity. And obesity has 3 different categories. I mean, remember, this is my field. So I'm seeing people, let's see, I just saw a patient today, and he's a man. He's 5'11", and he's 325 pounds. So he has a body mass index of 45.3. So again, why is that so significant? We know that the higher your BMI, the higher the risk of developing weight-related conditions such as type 2 diabetes, and it's a physiological metabolic dysfunction. The only thing that you have to remember though about BMI is that, just say we had Dwayne Johnson here. So if you know, Dwayne Johnson is The Rock, and I'm just going to make up his numbers, but just say he's 6 foot tall. I don't know how tall he is. I'm making it up. And just say he's 310 pounds. Although his BMI would be a 42 and it would indicate an obesity, we can actually say, no, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is not obese because he has a lot of muscles. So that's one of the problems with BMI. It doesn't distinguish between body composition. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, because it's body composition that has more of an effect on your risk of diabetes and weight-related conditions than the actual weight. Okay, so again, this is just something to play around with at home. When you're in private, just get on the NIH, just type in BMI calculator, and this will pop up, and you can type in your height and weight and then calculate it yourself. Okay, all right, so let's get to some of these slides. All right, so everybody sees the slides? Okay, shake your head. Okay, perfect. All right, so fixing your fat burn, where did we even get that title from? That is to indicate to you that if we can affect change in our body fat, that's really going to affect a positive change in your health. And remember, the purpose of this workshop is to make little changes, little mindful changes and meaningful changes that can have an effect on your health. So first you have to understand really what are the causes of diabetes. And there was a really interesting TED talk by a doctor, and he was saying, you know how we're always talking about if you're overweight or obese, you have a risk of diabetes, but he was looking at it from a different perspective. Is it actually a dysfunction in your blood sugar metabolism, which is pre-diabetes, which would actually cause somebody to be overweight and obese? So it's flipping it around. And I can actually tell you that I've had experience anecdotally with my patients that have pre-diabetes and they just can't lose weight. It is just such a difficult time to lose weight, no matter how much we manipulate their calories. And that just goes to show that your weight is really dictated by your physiology. And if you have a dysfunction in that, it does affect your weight and your health. Okay, so remember that diabetes is a metabolic disorder because it's going to directly impair your ability to release and store energy from food. Okay, so whenever you eat, whether it's a carb or ice cream or a steak all of that has to be digested into the smallest unit called glucose, because our body has to create ATP, which is energy, for us to function, not just to walk around and do some exercise, but for our heart to continue to pump and for our brain to continue to work. So we have to constantly have a supply of glucose in our blood. Okay, so that's why when we eat, it's really important. You're going to digest and create it. Now, some foods will create blood sugar to go up quickly, like carbohydrates, like things like carbs, sugar, fruit, ice cream, candy. That's going to digest really quick and really surge that glucose in your blood. So you have a hormone called insulin, which helps to regulate it. It helps to bring it down. So that's why if any of us here that don't have diabetes, just say you had a Snickers bar and you decided to take your blood glucose within that, an hour after you ate that Snickers bar, it would be through the roof. But what would happen is slowly it would start to come down. Now, people with diabetes, if you took the blood sugar even after 2 hours, sometimes it's still elevated because they have a dysfunction in how much insulin their body's making or how the body's actually recognizing the use. Okay, so diabetes is definitely a chronic condition. And what that means is that if you don't maintain a certain level, it can progress to something that's even worse. And the reason why diabetes is so scary is that it can actually affect the other organs. When you have very high blood sugars, your body doesn't like that. And it can start doing damage to little capillaries that supply your eye with blood. So you could get something called retinopathy, or it could affect your nerve tissue. And that's why sometimes we see patients with diabetes have neuropathy. It can actually slow down the movement of your stomach and your intestines. That's called gastroparesis. So diabetes is, it's a scary thing, but it is manageable. And I do believe that it can be put in remission in a lot of cases, maybe not all cases, but in a lot of cases. So that's what we'll talk about. So there you go. I always get ahead of myself. The other thing too, just to be aware of, and again, because I work in a hospital, this is what I see. People that have uncontrolled diabetes they're putting themselves at risk of blindness and peripheral neuropathy and amputations. Did you ever think about why somebody with, diabetes might be at risk of an amputation? It's because they lose feeling in their extremities. They lose feeling in their toes and their feet and their hands. So if they develop a wound, they don't feel it. And when you have high blood sugars, you have a less of ability to heal that wound. And then unfortunately, it will fest and become infected, and then it becomes a bigger problem. The other thing that I see is diabetes is a very high risk of developing kidney disease as well. So there is a relationship between high blood sugars and high blood pressure and kidney disease. And again, I work right next to a transplant department. So believe me, I see a lot of the devastating effects of having kidney disease. So different types of diabetes. Now, the type 1 diabetes is, we believe it's an autoimmune reaction, which means that your own body is attacking those beta cells in the pancreas. So it used to be called juvenile diabetes. That's what we used to call it. That was the old-fashioned name. It's genetic. It means that people with type 1 diabetes will always have to take some sort of insulin because their body just isn't making it. Type 2 diabetes is, again, usually related to weight or environment or even medication. I do have a couple of patients that took certain medications and it hurt their pancreas. And unfortunately, they developed diabetes from that. And then gestational diabetes, of course, wouldn't happen in a man. That would only happen in a pregnant woman. And it doesn't happen in every pregnant woman, but that's why it is a hospital policy to test a woman, I believe, in her first trimester to make sure her blood sugars are normal during pregnancy. Now, unfortunately, diabetes is very disheartening. Over 30 million US adults have it. 1 in 4 of them don't even know that they have it. So it's a very diagnosed condition. It is the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. It is the #1 cause of that kidney failure that we talked about, and the amputations and the blindness. And in the last 20 years, the number of adults diagnosed with diabetes has more than tripled. And this is just in the United States. I can tell you that it's also a global problem. But this is something I really want you to pay attention to, something called pre-diabetes. We're always saying prevention is the best thing, but most of us have, or a majority of us have, dysfunction in our blood sugars. They're not diagnosed as diabetes, but it's diagnosed as high blood sugars. And in the United States, over 84 million adults have more than 1 in 3 have something called pre-diabetes. Okay, and the problem is we don't even know that we have it. So how would you actually detect this? I'm going to show you in a minute. So with pre-diabetes, the blood sugar levels are higher than normal, but they're not high enough for a doctor to make a diagnosis of diabetes. However, if we don't take care of that pre-diabetes, most likely it's going to progress to diabetes. Okay, so like we mentioned before, it's the high body fat, not necessarily your BMI, that will predict diabetes. So for all of us that might do our BMI, okay, just say you have a BMI that's high, that's in the overweight. You also have to pay attention to what your body composition is. So I don't want anybody to panic. And if you don't know what your body composition is, I highly encourage you to get to that fitness center and talk to Karen about the InBody so you can actually see what your body composition is. Because just having a singular number, a number on a scale, or calculating a BMI just doesn't give a full snapshot of you as a person and your metabolism and your body and your individuality, okay? So I know that you've looked at this picture before, but now we know that body fat is very endocrine. And although we need body fat, it's very important because it cushions and it gives us storage of energy. Too much of it is actually not good for us. It disrupts hormones. It disrupts the way we metabolize sugar. So the higher it is, the higher the risk. So I'm in this age bracket, 41 to 60. I need to be within a 23 to 35%. Okay, so that's my healthy range. Okay, so even though I'm 145 pounds, if I was 145 pounds, but higher in fat, even though I was a normal BMI, if I had an abnormal body fat, I would be at risk of conditions, especially pre-diabetes. Plus I'm Asian, I'd really have a problem. Okay, so this is another way to look at it. Okay, so the higher the body fat, the difference you're going to see even in your own body. And I always tell the story about how a patient had said to me, well, you're not a thin woman. And I remember I felt a little insulted, of course, but I was saying to the patient, yeah, but you don't see the six pack. Yeah, right. Okay, I don't look like this, I promise. But I was trying to explain, look, I might seem like a beefy woman, but I do have a normal body fat. I like to think that I have some good muscles. They might not be so defined because I'm not lower in my body fat percentage, but at least I'm in a normal body fat. And the same thing with the guys. And remember, it's where we hold the fat that also causes a problem. The more you hold it here around the abdomen, whether you're a guy or a girl, the higher the risk of pre-diabetes, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so definitely go get your body fat measured. It's really important in goal setting. It really is, because I don't want anybody to get just fixated on a number on a scale. Okay, because that's not telling you the whole picture. It really isn't, because if you're 120 pounds, but 50% body fat, guess what? You're not in a healthy state in terms of a body composition. Okay, and if you're 150 pounds with a 25% body fat, you might be a little bit higher on the BMI, but your body composition is more conducive to health. Okay. The other measurement you should be taking is your waist measurement. Very important, because if you have a waist measurement, if you're a woman and your waist is larger than 35 inches, that's putting you at risk of prediabetes because of the visceral fat that you're holding in your abdomen. And again, it's very endocrine, so it's giving you that metabolic dysfunction. And for men, your waist needs to be under 40 inches. Okay, so take that tape measure and start measuring your waist and see what it is. And if you really get into the mood, you can do a waist to hip ratio. And if you have a body waist hip to ratio that's within this range, this range, it needs to be under 0.8 for women, or under 0.95. And the way you would calculate waist to hip ratio is you take your waist measurement, you take your hip measurement and you do the ratio, and that's how you would do it. Okay. And the reason why that's another really good measurement is that all body shapes are different. Some people might have a really long torso. Some people might have a bigger butt, okay. So body, shapes are different. Oh, got to put in a little humor in there. Ha ha. You are what you eat. I need to eat a skinny person. Ha ha. Okay. I can't hear you laughing, but I know you are. All right, so one thing that you absolutely should have on your lab tests, which I think, the doctors really do this, which is nice, is something called the A1C, the glycosylated hemoglobin. And what it is an estimated average of your glucose, okay, over a 3-month period. So when you have a lab test and it shows you your glucose level, that again doesn't tell you too much. It really doesn't. Now the range might be 60 to 99. And just say you're 102. I don't want you to panic because maybe at that one point in time, that blood glucose was high, even if you went in fasting. But if you get the A1C, that's what's going to show you the average over the 3-month period. Were you constantly at a high level or were you on average in a normal level? So if you have an A1C that's less than 5.7%, that's a normal blood sugar for the average. If prediabetes is if you have 5.7 to 6.4. Okay, so just say you got your blood sugar and it's 104, so you know it's high, and then it's constantly high in that range. Your A1C is obviously going to be higher. And then diabetes is usually diagnosed if you have an A1C of 6.5 or higher. Now, being in the field, I have seen A1Cs of 11, 12, 14. So you can imagine just how high somebody's blood glucose might be. That blood glucose might be in the 200s, the 300s, the 400s. Very, very dangerous because, again, you're going to be starving your brain, you're hurting your capillaries. It's pretty dangerous, and people do end up in the hospital that way. The other thing that's a little scary is, of course, when you have different diabetes, you are at risk of cardiovascular disease because it also affects your cholesterol levels. So it's all related. That's that metabolic syndrome. And then this crazy term, diabesity, is a term that was described in the 1970s to show that relationship between body weight and diabetes. I always get them confused. All right, so what would be our goals? Our goals would be, if there's a strong association between excessive weight, and I'm not talking about excessive weight because of muscle mass, excessive body fat and diabetes, well, I think one of the things would be, let's see if we can get off some of this weight. Statistics show that even if you can get 5 to 10% of that weight loss, that actually is going to confer a very big benefit. So that might not be too much. So, I got to do the math. I got my calculator here. All right. So just say, we'll do easy numbers because you know me. So just say I'm 200 pounds and I'm pre-diabetes. 5% weight loss would be about 10 pounds. So that's very doable. And if I can do 20 pounds, that's 10%. So if I can do 10 to 20 pounds of weight loss, that's very realistic for somebody to think about rather than thinking, oh no, you have to lose 50 pounds or 40 pounds. That might not be necessary to do that to still confer health. Okay. Even intentional weight loss of 3% in some people actually confers a benefit. But honestly, I like 5%. And you got to be realistic with your goal as well. So let's talk about what carbohydrates are. Believe it or not, people don't know what carbs are. You think you do. But then when I ask my patients and my clients, all right, well, what's a carbohydrate? They forget that even dairy products are carbohydrates. All right. So it's not just about the bread and the pasta and the candy. We've got fruit that are carbohydrates, vegetables are carbohydrates, dairy products are carbohydrates. So carbs are the biggest food group. That's why it's difficult for us to stay on a low carbohydrate diet because your diet would be very boring and ultimately unhealthy without the carbohydrates. You just have to remember, though, it's not just carbs that affect blood sugar. It's fat and protein. So it always makes me chuckle a little bit when somebody has diabetes and they want to go on a keto diet. that might not necessarily be the healthiest for you. Or if you go on a high protein diet, all of the nutrients, the macros, are going to still make glucose. It's just that carbohydrates will raise it quicker than proteins or fat. Okay, so these are all the carbs. So think about it. What's off this list? Meat. Meat is off this list, right? So fruits, veggies, dairy, grains, starches, and don't forget starchy vegetables too, like sweet potatoes, all the legumes, the lentils, sugars, obviously, and anything that's processed. So all of these are the carbs. So how would you tackle this? If you said, okay, you know what, I really want to take something from this lecture. Well, if you know your blood sugars, great, because that means you're one step ahead. And if you are in a normal range, beautiful, let's keep it that way. If you are in a pre-diabetic range, let's see if we can make that better and get back to a normal range. And if you do have diabetes, it doesn't mean that you can't put it into remission. Now, I work with surgical patients, and bariatric surgery absolutely puts diabetes into remission, but not all of us would want to get surgery for that, nor would you qualify for it. So maybe your diet with exercise and medication, and then eventually get rid of medication if that's even possible. So one way you can do it is something called the plate method. Now, the way nutritionists would be helping people with diabetes or pre-diabetes with their diet, it used to be really strict. It used to be crazy. We would tell you, oh, no, you can't have sugar and you have to read every single food label. Well, you know what? The guidelines over the years have really relaxed a little bit. And that's because we have to keep things realistic. If I told somebody, all right, I'll use myself an example. You guys know me. I'm half Asian, I'm half British, and I'm married to a Sicilian. So there's no way you can tell me, Lil, you can't have rice, you can't have pasta, and you can't have potatoes. It's never going to happen because that's my culture and that's something that I enjoy. I would just have to learn how much of that should I be eating. Okay. So one way we can do it is something called the plate method, where you have your plate, you know, your 9-inch plate, and you look at what you're actually putting on that plate. You actually focus on it. Okay. Don't mindfully or mindlessly just fill up the plate, right? So you want the bulk of that plate to be non-starchy vegetable, whether it's a salad or sauteed spinach or a vegetable medley, whatever you like. Let half that plate be the veggie. The carbohydrates, the starches, let that be about, I guess that's a quarter of the plate, right? Which is about half a cup. And then the same thing with the protein foods. So if you have a nice piece of salmon or, a lean filet mignon or a chicken breast, let that be the other quarter. So you can actually visualize your own plate and without even measuring anything, just create your plate like this. So that's the diabetes plate method. And that's actually been very, very useful for people that don't want to sit there and start measuring things out. They don't really cook at home. They eat out a lot. So try it because this would also be a nice way to decrease your calories, because non-starchy vegetables are very low in calorie and very high in fiber. So it should help you to feel full. The other thing we mentioned too is your beverage. You can really tackle calories by making sure your beverage is low calorie. So of course, we're going to say water is the best, and we've had our lectures on that, but some sort of sugar-free, calorie-free beverage would be ideal. So that's basically what we're saying here. Fill your plate with non-starchy vegetables, at least half. So what are the non-starchy vegetables? Because that's what you might be asking. Well, I don't know what that is. Okay, it's almost everything, all the vegetables, right? The green leafy vegetables, and you're going to get antioxidants from that. Asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower. Even though cauliflower is white, it's still really healthy for us. Brussels sprouts, the cabbage family, your carrots. A lot of people are afraid of carrots. That always makes me chuckle. Yes, carrots are high in sugar. This is true, but you would have to eat 10 pounds of raw carrots to actually affect your blood sugar. I don't think anybody's going to be doing that. So you can have your carrots, cucumbers, eggplant, mushrooms, okra. So these would be the non-starchy vegetables. So go crazy with it. The quarter should be the protein. Okay, so the reason why this is important is because with all the talk about high protein diets, people are going crazy with high proteins. Now, if you're trying to bodybuild, that's going to be next week's lecture. If you're trying to bodybuild, then you might need extra protein, but just eating high proteins isn't necessarily good for us. A protein is very hard to digest. Physiologically, it's going to spit out a lot of ammonia and nitrogen, and it can actually harm your kidneys, especially if you're not hydrating very well. And it has the same amount of calories as carbohydrates. So that always makes me laugh. People are decreasing their carbs, but increasing their protein. And guess what? It's got the same amount of calories per gram. So you're defeating the purpose, right? So you should fill a quarter of your plate with the lean proteins. And if you do like to measure things, anywhere between 3 to 5 ounces, okay? And of course, doing things that are lean would be better because we want to make sure we're not eating a lot of fat. So your chicken, turkey, eggs, egg whites, your seafood, shellfish if you eat it. If you're going to do beef, make sure it's very lean. Okay, things with loin at the end of it are very lean. If you do pork, make sure it's the center cut. If we go to the Chinese restaurant and we want those ribs, those are not lean. Okay, so maybe you can have that every once in a while, but it really shouldn't be on the menu every month. If you do deli meats, make sure they're lean, like ham and turkey and chicken, those would be lean. I do recommend too to try to do the ones that don't have nitrites and nitrates in them. Those would be preservatives that have pretty harmful effects on our stomach. So if you do deli meats, try to do the ones that don't have nitrites and nitrates. A good brand would be, and I don't promote any brand, but this is a brand, it's called Applegate Farms. Those are nitrite free. I believe Dietz and Watson are also. So even though Boar's Head is actually a good quality deli meat, I think a lot of them do have nitrites and nitrates. So you might want to go to their Simplicity line because those actually don't. So there's a lot of choices that we can make. Cheese and cottage cheese, okay? And remember, plant-based proteins, if you can get to more of a plant-based diet, and I'm not talking about vegetarianism. If you don't want to be a vegetarian, that's okay. But maybe you can consider some meals being plant-based instead of having some sort of meat every single meal. So a plant-based protein would be any of the beans and lentils and things like that, peas, nuts and nut butters, your tofu, edamame, okay, and some of those plant-based meat substitutes. I think a couple of weeks ago or a couple months ago, somebody had asked me about the Impossible Burger, and I believe that's made out of a pea protein. Okay, so the other quarter should be filled with carbohydrates because those are important too, but only about a quarter. So again, that's not much. It's probably about a half a cup to a cup if you want to measure things out. So that would include fruit and dairy and starches. Okay, and I know it seems so deceiving, like, oh my gosh, isn't fruit healthy for us? Yeah, fruit's healthy for us, but it does have a lot of fructose. And I know we talked about that. So the grains would be any of those grain products that we really love. And if you do grains, if you do complex whole grains, that would be better. That would mean higher fiber, which means it digests slower, which means it doesn't surge insulin, which is good too. And look at this, you got the beans and legumes. You kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You get a starchy complex carbohydrate, but you also get protein too. Okay, so we talked about the water. The other thing we should always consider too is keeping your sodium at bay as well, just because we know that relationship between high blood pressure and diabetes and prediabetes, okay? So when I say low sodium, if you are actually being treated for high blood pressure, and this is where people get confused, I will talk to patients and I'll ask them, do you have high blood pressure? Oh, no, I don't have high blood pressure. And then I'm looking at their med list and they're on diuretics or they're on blood pressure meds. So in their mind, they don't have high blood pressure because the medication is working to keep their blood pressure normal. But guess what? You still have high blood pressure. You're being treated for high blood pressure. So that means you still have to watch your sodium. So if you're being treated for high blood pressure with medication, you still have to keep your sodium to about 1,500 milligrams per day. Okay, so if you like that salt shaker, put it down. And if you are not being treated for high blood pressure, it doesn't mean have a field day and go crazy with sodium. You should keep your sodium to about 2,000 to 2,300 milligrams per day. So there we go. Those are the numbers, just to give you an idea. I mean, 1 teaspoon of salt, that's it. I mean, and the thing that's so crazy is, a lot of foods have salt in them because salt is a preservative. Salt is a flavor enhancer. Salt, we know, stimulates hunger. So the food industry likes to put salt in things because they want to make you hungry. So you buy more of their product. So really, really start reading your food labels. Use herbs in its place. Use other salt-free spices, to give your food flavor. Always try to keep things high in fiber as well, because the higher the fiber, it's good for your intestines, but it's also good for blood sugar. It helps to keep things normal because it doesn't surge blood insulin, the insulin, okay? All right, another method you can do, and this is where those exchange lists come into play. It's called carbohydrate counting. And I know some of you might be thinking, oh my gosh, do I have to really start counting this stuff? No, there are lots of different techniques, but I can tell you that if you have your goals of getting to a certain place in your health and you don't want to put the work into it, there is no Harry Potter wand to say, poof, okay, it's done. You have to invest in your health, which means you have to do some things. What you decide what you want to do should actually be pretty mindful. So if you're like, well, I don't want to do this carbohydrate counting, okay, maybe that technique's not good for you. Maybe do the diabetes plate instead. Or maybe you just like to measure out your food. That's another technique. But if you wanted to use the carbohydrate counting, that's when you would do something called the exchange list. So that's why I wanted to give this to you. Let me go back to it. So these are the exchange lists. And of course, it's not all inclusive, but it's got a lot of foods in there. And what these exchange lists show you are portion sizes of the food and how much carbohydrate it gives you per serving size. So here's just a good example. If you have an English muffin, half of an English muffin is 1 serving, which is 1 carbohydrate, which gives you 15 grams of carb. Okay, so that's how you would use a chart like this. If you have some sort of cereal, so you got fiber 1 cereal, half a cup is 1 serving, which is 1 carb, which is 15 grams of carbohydrate. Now, why is this exchange list so significant? I wanted you to have this because if you have a box of cereal and you're looking at the food label, those food labels for those serving size are dictated by the food industry. So it might tell you, oh, serving size of fiber 1 is 2/3 of a cup. That's given to you by the manufacturing company. These exchange lists are more of the physiological effects of that carbohydrate. So as you can see, the brand cereal or a lot of these carbs would be half a cup. Okay, so that's where a lot of people get a little confused, like, oh no, the box says I can have a cup. Okay, so if you do a cup of fiber 1 cereal, because that's what the box tells you to do, that's 2 carbs, which gives you 30 grams of carbohydrate. So if you're really trying to control your carbohydrates, you really need to use the exchange lists rather than the food label. So that's where the food industry does get a little tricky, I have to say. Okay, so what this list is it's going to tell you all the foods that contain carbohydrates. So that's why I gave you the list of carbs, like starches. I gave you the list for fruits. Okay, so let's look at this one. So fruits, a small apple. So what do I mean by small? So small would be about the size of a tennis ball. Okay, and as you know, because of genetic engineering, some of these apples look like mini pumpkins. They're ridiculous. So try to get something that's small, all right? That will give you, that's 1 carb, which gives you about 15 grams of carbohydrate. So the point here is, yes, fruit is healthy for us, but if you're going to eat fruit all day, you're eating a lot of carbohydrates. And a lot of the carb is, of course, in that simple sugar. Okay, so let's look at something called raspberries. There we go. Raspberries, those berries. You can have a cup. How nice is that? Or let's see, somebody had blueberries. My friend there was eating blueberries. 3/4 of a cup is the serving size of blueberries. That means if you eat 3/4 of a cup, you're getting approximately 15 grams of carbohydrate. Okay, so that's the fruit list. milk and dairy. See, sometimes we forget milk and dairy. Now, non-dairy products, like if you do almond milk, get the unsweetened because that lowers the carb, because almond milk isn't naturally high in carbohydrate. Okay. Soy milk, not necessarily high in carbohydrate, but if you buy rice milk, oat milk, hemp milk, obviously those are grain products. That's going to be higher in carb, just like cow's milk. Okay. So what you want to do is do low fat because we want to get rid of some of that fat, but let's look at a serving size. So if we do, all right, we're not going to do whole milk. All right. All right. Just say we do milk, whether it's whole milk or low fat milk, 1 cup. 1 cup is a serving size. So if you're doing the low fat milk, it gives you about 12 grams of carbohydrate, but it's the fat that actually is affected. So the carbohydrate is basically the same, whether it's whole milk, low fat milk, 1% milk, skim milk. The only difference is the fat content. So that's why nutritionists are always telling you, have low fat or skim milk. Okay. The other thing, though, there are different products out there. I know there's a product called Fairlife. Fairlife is a type of milk that actually is ultra pasteurized that actually reduces the total carbohydrate. It only has 7. So that's pretty good. 1 cup having 7 grams of carb. So it's about, looking at different products. Now, these non-starchy vegetables, the reason why we get so excited about them is because each serving size of a non-starchy carb only gives you 5 grams of carb. That's it. So what is a serving size? 1 cup of raw vegetables, a whole cup of spinach is only going to give you 5 grams of carb. That's it. And it's going to give you lots of fiber and antioxidants, and it's beautiful. Okay. If you're doing vegetable juice, try to make it yourself so you can control the sodium. But the serving size of the juice would be 1/2 cup. And if you do cooked veggies, 1/2 cup. All right. So 1/2 cup of broccoli gives you 5 grams of total carbohydrate. 1 cup of lettuce, 1 cup of spinach, 1 cup of raw veggies gives you 5 grams of carbohydrate. So that's the reason why nutritionists are always telling you, eat more vegetables, eat more vegetables. They're just very low in calories, low in carbs, high in fiber, high in antioxidants. They're just really good for us. So that's that whole list there. And then, of course, I gave you this other list to just give you an estimate about all the other sweets and processed foods and desserts, just so you're familiar with it. Okay, so that's how actually you would look at a list like this. Now, meats, whether it's poultry, seafood, turkey, chicken, they are very low in carbohydrates, right? Because they're animal products, they're meats, and seafoods and things like that. It only becomes higher in carbohydrate depending upon how you make it. So if you have a steak that you marinated in barbecue sauce, well, the barbecue sauce is probably going to have a lot of sugar in it. And that's why you just increase the calories and the carb. So if you're doing, proteins, try to keep sauces on the side, try to do things like grilled or baked or poached, things like that. If you're slobbering it with different sauces, well, then you're going to change the carb intake. Okay. So that's what this is showing you. See, it's got low fat. You want to focus on the fat, but it's got very little carbohydrate. Okay. And then we call these free foods. I don't know. I don't like the word free, but this is just saying, look, have all the water you want. Some of the seasonings, like the natural seasonings, they're very low calorie, low carbohydrate. But remember, some of the sauces, that's what would actually have some stuff in it. All right. So that's why I just wanted you to have that list. It's kind of fun to look at things. What it means is that you got to go beyond just reading food labels. You have to also look at measuring your food out. Okay, let's go back to this. All right. All right. So how would you actually do something like carb counting? So just say you're following a 1,200 calorie diet. And I tell you, all right, you still have to eat all the macros. I want you to eat carbs, proteins, and fats. But I'm going to tell you how many carbs you can have. You can have about 45% of your calories that come from carbs. Where did I get 45%? Well, you look at the guidelines, they're saying anywhere between 45 to 60% of your diet should come from carbs. Honestly, I think 60% is really high unless you're an endurance athlete. Okay. Somebody with diabetes, somebody with excessive weight, somebody, that wants to really tighten their diet, I tend to go a little bit on the lower side, 40 to 40%, 40 to 45%. So 45% of 1200, and I wrote it here so I don't have to do the math, is 540 calories. But it's hard to work with things based on calories. You got to look at grams. So you would divide that by 4. That means 45% of calories coming from carbs on a 1200 calorie diet means you can have 135 grams of carb every day. So if one exchange is 15, right, that would mean that you can have 11 carbs per day. So you can look at this in different ways. You can say, okay, I will just count up my carbs for the day. And as long as I don't go over 135, that's how many I need. But if you're thinking, that's a little hard, maybe I'll just go according to the exchanges. How many carb servings can I have per day? That would be 11. But you would have to have your exchange list. Okay, so that's why this isn't for everybody either. But I can tell you that people that are really serious about getting their blood sugars in control and they want to decrease the amount of insulin or the amount of metformin or glipizide or all those medications, you have to look deeply into your diet and make some changes. And I'm saying that because I've worked with patients with diabetes, and sometimes it gets very frustrating because the doctor's frustrated because they think they're modifying their diet, and then they just keep telling, take more insulin, take more insulin. And remember, there are consequences and risks of more medication. The goal should always be to decrease the meds. All right, so here would be one example. So breakfast, you could have 3 exchanges. All right, so that would be, so if I had 1 cup of fiber cereal, that's 2 exchanges right there. If I had a piece of fruit, that's my exchange. So I could have 1 cup of fiber cereal with 3/4 cups of blueberries. Those are my 3 exchanges for breakfast. And then snack, 15 grams of carb. Okay, maybe I'll have a slice of toast, or maybe I'll have another fruit, or maybe I'll have a glass of milk. Okay, lunch, 3 exchanges. All right, so maybe I'll have a big salad with a cup of spinach. That's only 5 carbs. So maybe I'll have 3 cups. That's 1 exchange. Then I'll have maybe some salmon on it, and it's going to be grilled. So that's not going to have much on it, but I want to put some salad dressing. So maybe the salad dressing will be an exchange, right? So it really is something that's doable, but you do have to look at it. So this is just a menu sample of how we would do it. If you are a sedentary, in other words, maybe you're doing a little bit of walking, you have your little doggy and you're walking, you're really not doing all that much. You're not, let's admit it. All right. Maybe that's all you can do, and that's okay. But then maybe we need to keep the grams of carb to about 30 to 40. Because remember, the more activity you have, the more it's going to use those carbs. So that's why, again, nutritionists and fitness instructors are always saying, come on, let's see if we can do a little bit more, because that means you can actually increase some of these carbohydrates. So that's what this is showing you. Okay, so again, this is just an example off of the exchange list. Your grains, 1 serving gives you 15 grams of carbohydrate. What size would that be? Well, it's about half a cup. It's not much. With fruit, 1 serving is 15 grams of carbohydrate. How much fruit? Depends on the fruit. So if you got berries, 3/4 cups of blueberries, 1 cup of raspberry. But now you're like, I don't like berries. I want watermelon. Okay, that's a different kind of fruit. So it's only about half a cup. Okay, no, I like mango. Oh, well, that's very sweet. It's anywhere between 1/4 cup to half a cup. So not all fruit is created equal. Milk and yogurt, remember, 1 serving, which is about a cup, gives you about 12 grams of carbohydrate. Things that are sweeteners, right? Honey, sugar, things like that. 1 serving, which is not much, it's about a teaspoon, gives you 15 grams of carb. So imagine that. 1 teaspoon of honey gives you 15 grams of carbohydrate. That could be a lot. It adds up. So again, go crazy with your vegetables, because 1 cup only gives you 5 grams if it's raw and half a cup if it's cooked. The meats, the eggs, the cheeses, that doesn't have carb. Okay. All right. So your meat should be about 3 to 5 ounces. Okay. So a deck of cards is about 3 ounces. So you can kind of gauge it. And this is after it's cooked. A lot of patients will ask me, is that before or after? So it's after it's cooked and it's edible portion. So obviously it's not the shell or the bones or the skin if you're not eating that. Now, fats can also affect blood sugar. So you just, it's a little bit slower just because it's digests slower, but it does rack up calories. So one serving, which would be for the oil, 1 tablespoon of oil gives you about actually anywhere between 45 to 100 calories. So it's a lot of calories. Okay. The other thing, try when you're reading your food labels, now the food labels will show you added sugar. At one time it didn't, it just told you total carbohydrate, sugar, fiber. Now it's telling you added sugar. That means that that product added sugar. That's why it's called added sugar, right? So that means that that product's going to have more than just what was naturally in the product. That's what that means. Oops, sorry. If you can, if you're doing cereals, try to avoid these sugary cereals. It's not appetizing to me personally, but of course, everybody's got different tastes. I have patients that love Captain Crunch or what's the other one with the marshmallows? Can't remember it, but you know what I'm talking about. So if you can, try to avoid those sugary cereals because you get a double whammy. You're getting the sugar and you're getting the starch. So that's why it's going to be so much higher in carbohydrate. Okay, this doesn't even look appetizing to me, and I did that on purpose. I tried to pick a picture that didn't look fun, but really limit sugars and sugar products. Doesn't mean you can't have any. It just means, be realistic about it. And I have a patient that made a very meaningful change. She's a nurse, so she would have about 5 to 6 cups of coffee a day. And each cup of coffee had anywhere between 3 to 5 teaspoons of sugar in it. She really liked her sweet coffee. So instead of decreasing the amount of coffee she had, she decreased the amount of sugar in each coffee. And it actually made a very significant difference in not just her blood sugar, but also her weight, which was pretty interesting. And then, of course, those carbohydrates, we always prefer the complex carbohydrates. That means higher fiber. It means that it's not ripped of all its nutrition. And when you're looking at a food label, you might hear something called net carbs. That means digestible carbs. So to decrease the amount of digestible carbs would mean you'd want to increase your fiber. So when you look at this product, whatever it is, 1 cup gives you 31 grams of carbs. I bet you this is a pasta. That's what it sounds like to me. So 1 cup of a white pasta might give you 31 grams of carbohydrate. And these are net carbs. This is what you're going to digest. This is a lot of carb, right? In one sitting. So what you want to do is make sure the fiber is high. So just say this product had 10 grams of fiber. So you decided, I'm going to get a whole grain pasta. I'm going to get an edamame pasta. I'm going to get a lentil pasta. It's going to be higher in fiber. What you do is if this is greater than 3 grams, so anything over 3 grams of fiber or more, you subtract that number from the total carbohydrate. And that's what gives you net carbs, how many carbs you actually digest. So that's another reason why we want things that are high fiber. Okay, like something like this. Yeah, 16 grams of carbohydrate, 3 grams of fiber. Carb well. All right. So what's my point here? Sugar-free is not necessarily carbohydrate-free. That's the other thing. That's the trick the food industry does to us. So here you get all excited. Yay, I can have my Oreo cookies. It doesn't have any sugar, Lil. Okay, but guess what? It still has 13 net carbs. Okay, so that would still be a lot of carbohydrate. One good thing to do is track yourself. I know I always mention that too. This is actually a very helpful app. It's free and it's very user friendly. So that's why I usually put that one first. But there are lots of different apps And if you like to do things the old-fashioned way, because I like to write things in a food diary, I have a nice pretty book, I write things down. So I'll put, breakfast, 1 cup of oatmeal, 1 teaspoon of brown sugar. I'll actually write it down. But then you actually have to look it up, right? So it's going back and forth. So whatever is easier for you, just as long as you're self-monitoring. This is just a nice little chart to give you estimations of portion sizes, just because a lot of us might be going to the club or to the restaurant. You don't want to whip out your scale and your, measuring utensils. So a golf ball is about 2 tablespoons. A tennis ball is anywhere between about 1/2 to 2/3 of a cup. A yo-yo, a yo-yo. Some of the younger generation might not even know what a yo-yo is, but a yo-yo is about 1 standard bagel or an English muffin. But if you go to some of these restaurants, some of these bagels, oh my goodness, they could be 5 ounces. That's 5 servings of a carbohydrate. The computer mouse is about 1/2 a cup to 3/4 of a cup. It's also about 2 to 3 ounces as well. A baseball or your fist, but I don't really like this analogy because everybody's hand is a different size. So I like this analogy better. So a baseball is about 1 cup. Okay, so at least you can kind of use this as a guide when you're out and about. Now, when you do go to restaurants, be choosy. I mean, come on, there are so many different restaurants and so many different food choices. That portion sizes are usually too big, and that's driven by us because we don't want to get ripped off. We think, oh my goodness, I'm paying, $20 for that. I want it to be a lot. I want to take home a doggy bag. That means that portion is going to be way too big. And sometimes we don't bring the doggy bag home because we just keep eating it. Right? So portion sizes are often too large. And remember, when you go out to eat, you obviously have less control about what's in it. And, there might be some sugars, there might be some, high sodiums. They might put the olive oils and the butter. And so it's going to be a higher calorie food. So some tips when you're eating out: try to get things that are steamed, that are grilled, roasted, broiled, baked, poached, maybe lightly sauteed, which is kind of like that stir fry kind of thing. Try to choose the red sauces over the white sauces. White sauces are typically, they have flour in them, they have butter in them, so they're going to be higher in calories. So some suggestions when you go out, just say you like Mexican food, try to do the soft tortillas, not the corn tortillas. So if it's like Taco Tuesday, try to do the soft tortillas. And there's actually a tortilla out there that's very high fiber. It's a brand called Mission. I don't know if you've seen that. I've seen them at Publix. They're very high fiber. So the net carb of that tortilla is 2 grams. That's it. So you can still have your little soft taco or your wrap. Definitely overload on the veggies. Go easy on the guacamole. That's an avocado. It's good for us, but it has a lot of fat. The sour cream, the cheese, kind of go light with that. Japanese, well, limit the starch portion. If you're doing sushi, remember sushi will have rice. If you do sashimi, that's just the fish and the vegetables. If you can avoid the tempura dish, that would be good. Tempura is fried. Okay, and try to do the light soy sauces just because soy sauce has a lot of sodium to begin with anyway. Doing a light soy will still have sodium in it. It's just a little bit on the lighter side. Now, Italian, if you can, avoid the pasta-based dishes. And you might be saying, but that's why I'm going to Italian. Okay, if you can, try to have maybe, I don't know, the marsala. Try to have a protein and then do the pasta as the side dish so you can really control for that. Skip the bread. We eat bread all the time, so skip that. If you do a salad, keep the sauces on the side. Don't do the fried calamari. Try to keep the fried stuff at bay. Remember, just do the plate method. That's the best thing. Or the other thing you can do is when you get your serving, cut it in half and just tell the waiter at that point, wrap half. Just cut it and wrap it. Don't even have it served to you. Only have half the portion served to you. Now, pizza, that's a popular food. I personally love pizza, but I like the thin crust, obviously, because that's going to be less bread. And the toppings, if you can cheat and put lots of vegetables on it, that's great. You're increasing your veggies. And if maybe do a white pizza, so, decrease the sauce, play around with it. But I think to make pizza really good, do the thin and do lots of vegetables. All right, Chinese food. Hey, look, I'm Asian. All right, I like my Asian food, but if you can, try to ask for the brown rice. And I can tell you, as a Korean, we don't really like brown rice. We like white rice, but I will sacrifice and have my brown rice. Choose lots of veggies. Do the low salt and the low sodium if you can, and just ask them, make sure no MSG. And just remember that Chinese food, what actually jacks up some of the calories is they use a lot of cornstarch and flour. And cornstarch is a type of carb. Okay, so that's what makes the sauces. So what you can tell them is just tell them, no, I want to stir fry, but no cornstarch. I want chop suey without the cornstarch. It'll be a lighter dish. All right, fast foods. Well, fast food places are trying to have healthier menu items. So that's a good thing. Maybe go for the Impossible Burger or a turkey burger or a vegetable burger. If you're doing chicken sandwiches, make sure they're grilled, not fried. Maybe just do a kid's portion if they sell it to you. I know sometimes they don't want to, you're not a kid, we're not going to sell you, but maybe they will. Maybe just do the chili, a small chili with a side salad. Maybe a small baked potato without any butter on it. I know that's boring, right? It doesn't even taste like anything. So maybe putting the chili on the small baked potato so you can actually have a flavorful potato. Maybe ask for fruit, a side of fruit or yogurt instead of the fries, baked potato, etc. So there are choices. Now, as you can see, when I started this lecture, we had this, background of cinnamon, and we do know that there's some limited evidence that when we eat cinnamon, that's actually good for our blood sugar. Just to let you know that when you actually look at the research, the findings have been very mixed about that. But I look at it this way. Cinnamon is not going to hurt you unless you have a reason why you shouldn't eat it. So if you don't have reflux, you're not allergic to it, you like the taste of it, put it in your food. Just make sure it's cinnamon, not cinnamon sugar. Okay. And you can put cinnamon in all different things, not just your breakfast foods. Look at some of the other cultures that use cinnamon in their stews and their lentils and their sauces. It's so yummy. Okay, I mean, look at this. 1 tablespoon only has 19 calories, so that's good. Has some carbohydrate, but look at this. It's got 4 grams of fiber. So remember, if we go by what we just learned, the net carb of cinnamon is only 2 grams. Okay, and look at it. It's got calcium in it. It has some iron in it. So it's actually pretty good for us. So I think the take-home message of this presentation is, prevention is the key. The best way to prevent it is get your labs done so you know what your A1C is. If for some reason your doctor is not testing your A1C, ask him to put that on your lab test. If he looks at you cross-eyed, just say, well, I want to make sure I don't have pre-diabetes, okay? Because getting just your glucose level isn't telling you the whole picture. Definitely continue with your wellness checkups. Definitely reduce your body fat. Remember, it's not just all about your weight. So if you're thinking about, how I can make myself better in terms of your health, get your body fat evaluated and start there. Definitely start with small goals. We can't, build Rome overnight. So just making small, meaningful changes, I think is, it's less disturbing. Diabetes is definitely manageable and treatable, but let's see if we can actually do something even better and put it into remission. Make 98% of your choices helpful. So it doesn't mean stop living. It doesn't mean you can't have a little bit of ice cream, but you know what? If it's your habit to have it every night, maybe that's something you should reconsider. All right. I know I talked a lot. Tell me what questions, comments, concerns? Something in the chat. Where can you get the lists? So the lists I did send to Karen. So Karen, you said it was on the fitness website. How can
but you can also pick up copies too in the fitness center if you want.
Oh, great. Center. Great. Yes, because it's a nice guide. Very good. It's when I'm the happiest with my dogs in the park. That was a lot of fun, you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I really do. This is lecture 3 of our metabolic lecture. So next month, we're going to be talking about intermittent fasting. That's a lot of fun too. Maybe that's something you might actually want to consider for your eating pattern. All right, you guys.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Lillian.
much,
My
Lillian.
pleasure. My pleasure. Hopefully I'll see you next week
Thank
for the other
you.
lecture. Yes, my pleasure.
Okay.
Have a
All
good
righty.
night.
Good night.
Take care.
Thank
Oh,
you
wait, I
very
have a
much.
hand up.